Chapter 6. You guys did well, commented Bart as he looked over the hall from Chet's. These parts will get you on your way. Yeah, we did all right. The muffler was a miracle, but sometimes people get work done and then the car develops a new problem, which is the end of the road. And I'm glad you stocked up on those front end struts. Time and rust make them almost immovable. Here, I'll show you how to make these things serviceable. The mechanic picked up a strut and took it over to the shop grinding wheel stand. Holding the rod horizontally, he turned on the power and pressed it against the spinning wheel. He ground a flat spot on the shaft just below the threads. Then he rotated it and ground a flat spot on the opposite side. I see what you have now, observed Jerry. You have some place to grab it. That's right, an adjustable wrench can slide right on there. Bart cleaned the nut and the threads with gas in front of the garage. Then he laid it down on the driveway to let the gas evaporate safely. You have to be very careful using gasoline. It must always be used outside. Don't get it on your skin and don't breathe the fumes. And stay away from sparks or flames. After 15 minutes, Uncle Bart picked up the parts up and took the shaft to the wire wheel. Carefully, he cleaned the threads with a spinning brush. Then he put the shaft in a vise. The jaws gripped the flattened slots he had ground earlier. That thing is definitely not going to turn, said the boy. After putting some oil on the lower nut, he put an adjustable wrench on the lower nut. A strong pull cracked the nut. Rocking it back and forth, he moved the nut lower on the shaft. The next step surprised Jerry. Hand me that hacksaw hanging on the wall, ordered Bart. He took it and unscrewed the flat blade and replaced it with a wire covered with aggregate material. But he left the forward hole on the new blade loose and poked it through the nut before securing the front hole on the hacksaw. Man! Bart put the nut in the vise and began to carefully saw a slot through the threads of the nut. When the cut was about 1/8 of an inch deep, he released the nut and turned it 1/4 before clamping it again. He continued this process until he had cut 4 slots. Now you see what we have created. A die. You'll be able to clean all the crud out of those threads. It will work like new. That's right. No more binding. We will send this down the threads carefully, back and forth with some oil. Then you can make any adjustments you need on the alignment machine. And you will need to get 2 new sets of rubber bushings. They get worn with time. The big metal washers last, but oil from the motor drips down and deteriorates the rubber. But they are inexpensive. We will just slap them in, Bart explained. Amazing, said Jerry, still astounded. Next time we go to a yard, get 1 more nut so you'll have 2 complete strut sets. We will hang this die up on a nail so we will always know where it is, said Uncle Bart. Bart and the boy walked out to the Phoenixville parts car with a cluster of tools and a box of old juice cans his mother had saved for him. The air was getting chillier with the coming of the Christmas season. We have to get the steering linkage disconnected to move it over to the convert. But it will be a lot easier if we take the fenders off first, advised the mechanic. Okay, I can see that. How about the hood? Should I remove that? I would say leave the hood on. When it rains, the hood will protect the voltage regulator, alternator, and other engine parts. I see what you mean, responded Jerry. Now, to keep track of all the nuts and bolts, take this masking tape and put a label on each can. Take this pen and write on the label where the bolts came from, like right fender. Then, when it comes time to put the fender on the other car, you will know what goes where, explained Bart. I would have never thought of that, said Jerry. Well, after all the fenders are off, you'll have to prepare them for painting. We'll send them out to a friend of mine who has a body shop. By the time he gets them back, by the time we get them back, it will be hard to remember where all the bolts go. The marked cans make it easy. Sounds like a way to go. But start with the bumper. That will reveal the splash pan. Headlight cowls come off with a couple of Phillips head screws. Be careful not to bend them, and don't lay the cowls down and then step on them. Remember, different cans for each item, advised Uncle Bart. The grill is delicate also. Just go slow. Don't force anything. I can do it. Once that is all taken apart, you can go to work on the fenders. What's the best way to attack? I would say start on the bottom section in the front of the door. Hit the back side with spray. It has been a while since I took one off. Once the lower sections are loose, you can take out the row of bolts that run along the edge under the edge of the hood. Then it should pop right off. If you have any problem, I'll be changing some tires. Just come get me, Bart assured the boy. After finding the hood release, Jerry raised the hood and looked over the screws that held the cowls in place. A few turns with a Phillips head screwdriver and had the cowl off in his hand. He placed the screws in a soup can and wrote on the label, LF cowl. The right cowl was soon off as well. So far so good, he thought to himself as he tried several sockets on the bumper bolts. He then gave each nut a shot of spray. He placed a ratchet on the socket to fit snugly and gave it a pull. The nut let go, and he rocked the ratchet back and forth until the nut and its washer were free. He placed them in a juice can marked bumper. The next bolt did not come free when he pulled on it. Uncle Bart had taught him to never slide a pipe on a ratchet, so he replaced the ratchet with a breaker bar and slipped on a 2-foot section of pipe. The rusted threads gave way when he applied the extra leverage. The bumper came loose and was moved out of the way. He sprayed the bumper support bolts as well as the many bolts on the splash pan. The grill came loose more easily because the bolts were not low where salt and sludge had been able to reach them. Before tackling the passenger side fender, he stowed all the parts and bolt cans in the trunk to keep them out of harm's way. He had installed the original convertible trunk lid using the bolts from the parts sedan. Jerry picked up a larger can and labeled it right fender. After spraying a bolt at the bottom, he began to crack a series of bolts running in a line along the top. He left 2 in place to hold it while he removed the bottom bolt. There was a lot of rust and a small hole. Uncle Bart had figured they could sandblast the rust and cut out the section around the hole. It was growing dark by the time Jerry had both fenders off, and it was time for his shift to begin. He picked up his first fender and carried it into the office. "You got it off," observed Bart. "I got them both off," returned Jerry. "You said the holes could be repaired." His uncle looked at the damage. "Yes, this is not too bad. Rust has to be treated or cut out with a new patch, or the rust keeps eating away. We'll blast it with sand and cut away the rust. There's a chemical that stops the rust. After we prepare it for painting, I'll take it down to Slim's body shop, and he can weld a patch in before he paints it. This will turn out fine." "Sounds good." "I have some algebra homework I'm starting to get bogged down with. Can you give me a hand with it?" asked Jerry as he lifted up his books from the bench. "Sure, what you got?" "Well, this stuff is becoming very complicated. I had no trouble with algebra last year, but this algebra 2 is something else." "Let me see what you're trying to do. It is very important to stay up with your math. You see, if you are studying English Lit and you get off track with William Shakespeare, you will not have any trouble with Robert Louis Stevenson later on. But with Algebra 2, if you don't understand what's on page 10, you can't do page 11. That's just the way it is," explained Uncle Bart. The mechanic slowly read the pages Jerry pointed out and tried to take apart the concepts. With this level of algebra, you can't just dive in and solve the equation. You have to look at it and see what can be changed and gotten rid of. You have to do that first. "All right," said Jerry, trying to follow along. In the end, you still have to solve for the unknown by getting it to one side by itself. But before you do that, you have to look around and see how the parts can be manipulated. Sometimes you'll be given a complex term. You have to pull apart the many factors. It's not horrible. Once you learn the techniques, you can move on in on it. I'll try. Algebra is a valuable skill to have. Once you learn it, every person has an IQ. This is the level of intelligence, went on Uncle Bart. This is your ability to learn, remember, and think out problems. Some people are super smart, like Professor Jackson, who comes in here for gas and tobacco for his pipe. He teaches engineering at Drexel University downtown. Other people are average like you and me. We can learn, but we have to put in study time to capture knowledge. Other unfortunate people could be in college for 20 years and they just don't have what it takes to pass the classes. They can still be happy. They can get a job helping a craftsman and make enough money to take care of themselves. They can live okay. Now, when a person with average intelligence takes algebra classes, it exercises their brain to a higher level. Their IQ does not go up, but their functioning is stronger. It is like when you lift weights, your muscles get stronger. So I'm very glad you're studying these classes. For the rest of your life, you'll be able to calculate your solutions to problems. You will know how to set up a situation and question and then how to solve it. I had thought this was just something we had to take. I did not see any practical use, said the boy. Oh no, this is essential for operating. Around here, it will be impossible to figure out how much antifreeze we need to add to a car to get the solution to minus 25 degrees if we did not have algebra. And one of the more useful tools is ratios and proportions. If you know the cost of one thing, you can figure out the cost of a great increase. Man, I never knew. Well, we'll get you going. And if we get bogged down, I'll ask Professor Jackson to give you a hand. He eats and sleeps algebra. He would help me? I'm sure he would. He likes to help students, and I helped him save a lot of money on his car. Some fool garage tried to tell me he needed a new radiator because his motor was overheating. I figured it was probably his thermostat. I checked it, and it was jammed up. I replaced it for $10, continued Bart. He was really happy. I guess he was. Another time, his battery kept dying, so his motor would not crank. The other morons sold him a new battery, but after a while the problem returned. The first thing I looked at was his alternator belt. It was loose, so I untightened the alternator support and slipped it over to tighten the belt. That solved the problem. I pointed it out to him, and he does not have to worry about his battery for a few years now. So he was way ahead of the game that way. Wow, what did he say about that? Jerry asked. He couldn't believe it. I did not charge him because it was so simple. But as you will see, goodwill is important in business. So I am sure he will help you. Another thing that will help you is in the back of the book, they have the answers to half of the problems. Sometimes when you have the solution, you can see what you need to do to arrive at the proper answer, continued his uncle. We will get this.